Just a few days ago, on May 18th of 2017, a funeral took place in Arlington National Cemetery. This funeral, with full military honors, including a flyover, a 21-gun salute, and the playing of taps, was for Vietnam War veteran Colonel William Edward Campbell. Colonel Campbell was a member of the United States Air Force and was a night owl, a group of pilots who flew bombing missions during the night from Thailand into Laos. On one of those flights in January 1969, Colonel Campbell was shot down. For 10 years, he was listed as missing in action, and then his status was changed to killed in action, body not recovered. That would be his classification until December 2016, when DNA discovered in a single bone and in a single tooth would positively identify Colonel Campbell. And then last week, after nearly 50 years, these remains, along with a military uniform, a silver star, and a Purple Heart, were finally laid to rest. It was reported that the urn containing his wife's ashes would rest on top of the uniform in the casket. According to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, at the end of the Vietnam War, there were 2,646 Americans unaccounted for. Today, over 1,000 of those have been recovered, which means that 1,611 are still missing. If you drive across America, you'll find plenty of towns where the total population is around 1,611. Imagine one of those entire towns just missing. Now imagine the families of those 1,611 individuals, the uncertainty they must feel, the loss, the wondering, the sleepless nights. On today's show, the final one of our series and our Memorial Day special, will devote the entire episode to one of those missing individuals, and you'll hear from some of his family. Whose family? Well, it happens to be my family. Welcome to the Memorial Day special of the By War and By God podcast. I'm your host, Kent Williamson. This show is a companion series to the award-winning documentary film By War and By God. In the podcast, we've been telling the remarkable accounts of people whose lives were forever changed by the Vietnam War. You've heard stories of heroism and stories of tragedy and stories of reconciliation. You've heard about the magnetic force that tugged and pulled some of our soldiers, medics, machine gunners, and crewmen back to Vietnam for the purpose of serving some of the poorest of the poor in that beautiful country. And today, you'll learn about one helicopter pilot who is yet to come home. My wife's uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Floyd W. Olsen. But before we jump into today's episode, allow me to tell you about Big Heaven Cafe. Big Heaven Cafe is the place to go to purchase the documentary film By War and By God. So please click your way to bigheavencafe.com. That's bigheavencafe.com and use the coupon code PODCAST to save $5 on your copy of By War and By God. And don't forget that 20% of all sales of By War and By God from Big Heaven Cafe go to the nonprofit Vets with a Mission, the group that since 1989 has taken nearly 1,400 Vietnam veterans back to Vietnam for healing and reconciliation. So today's show is a little different and it's a little more personal. Today you'll be hearing from my mother-in-law and my wife. My mother-in-law, Sandy Sturch, is Floyd Olsen's sister, and my wife, Karen, is Floyd's niece. Two of today's interviews were recorded a few years back in my nice, quiet basement, but one was recorded along China Beach on one of the trips I made to Vietnam to gather material for the film. So today's episode is the Floyd Olsen story. But who was, or for reasons you'll learn later, perhaps I should say, who is Floyd Olsen? Let's find out.
In the beginning.
We'll begin with my mother-in-law, Sandy Sturch.
Floyd grew up with model airplanes in his room and always really wanted to be a flyer. We were World War II kids and always admired people that were involved in the war. When he was at Wheaton College, he took ROTC, which meant that when he graduated from college, he was eligible to go into the Army, in fact was obligated to go into the Army as a commissioned officer.
At that time, Vietnam was smoldering. The war had yet to take its toll on the American people.
Whatever our purposes were, we were going to go in and do and get out, and I wasn't much concerned about it until my brother was sent to Vietnam. I wasn't terribly concerned about the first tour of duty. Many of our armed forces went to Vietnam, served for a year, and got back okay. But then as the war progressed and the years went on, the word seemed to be, you might go for your first tour and get back okay, but not as many people went for their second tour and came back. So when he went the second go-round, he was an Army pilot, fixed wing first time, helicopter search and rescue second time, and in charge of helicopter maintenance throughout South Vietnam. That was really his primary duty. So I was much more concerned when he left the second time. But I still was convinced he would come back, mainly because so many people were praying for him. And I really believed that when we asked the Lord to keep him safe, that he would come back. I was confident. Some friends, very close friends, begged him not to go a second time because casualties were running very high by now. But he went back in 1967 and was getting close to the end of that tour of duty, was engaged to be married, and in April of 1968, he went out on a mission to rescue a downwind helicopter, and they were shot down by enemy fire.
The engagement.
I mentioned that Floyd was engaged to be married, and I had never met his fiancée. And so I had written to this girl in Illinois, Marilyn Hayes was her name, and introduced myself by letter, and Floyd wanted me to give her a ring on his behalf, and he had bought a diamond just before he was sent to a tough area, and he said, I'm uneasy holding on to this diamond. I'm sending it to you tonight because in the morning I have to leave, and I don't want to take this with me. And I got this envelope with a little bulge in it, and I opened it up, and here was this note from Floyd saying, I know you think I'm crazy for sending this to you this way, but I'm afraid to take it with me. And so here was this, I think it was a carat diamond, that he had wrapped a little piece of tissue paper. That was it. He said, I'll tell you later what to do with it. So later he wrote and described how he wanted me to have the diamond set. And so I did that, and then invited Marilyn to Houston. It was right around Easter time. He sent me a note to give her. It was sealed in an envelope, of course, to give her with the ring, and I was to hide it in the guest room and let her go in there and find it. And Floyd said, as soon as she sees it, she'll scream,